Chief Daryl Gates, speaking to the news media for nearly an hour, called the beating of Rodney King an aberration that should have never happened.
When Chief Gates came out and said that the Rodney King incident was an aberration, it made me really angry, and I gave a press conference a few days later. The only aberrant thing about Rodney King was that not only did someone get it on videotape, but they were able to get it out to the public. And Rodney was lucky. He's alive. There are a lot of them that are not.
Again. Leave. What, are you gonna hit me too? No, but I will take you to jail. You ain't taking my camera.
Get in the house, man. Get in the house. We need that. We can't do it.
I'm out of here, man.
The 2 years since the beating of Rodney King and the release of the holiday video has been characterized by really an extraordinary effort by politicians and the media to contain the fallout from this incident and to really confuse people about its political significance. What the tape reveals in its most stark form are the real state of class relations in this country. It shows a state at war with its own people. Thousands of workers, youth, minorities, and immigrants are subjected to the same kind of dehumanizing brutality that we see on the holiday videotape all the time, and yet this is covered up by local police departments.
From here, and they're pretty devastating blows. About 1,500 to 1,600 pounds per square inch is generated.
Come on, let's go.
On the mentality flourished during the era of Daryl Gates. Remember, many of his speeches, he used the word aggressiveness. In the name of aggressiveness, it's okay to stamp someone's civil rights. That sends a very strong message to the rest of the police department, and management responds according to the wishes of the chief.
Mary Queen 39, Roger, 17U7, 17U7, come in. Mary Queen 39, Roger, 17U7, 17U7, come in.
On August 1st, 1988, approximately 80 police officers got together with a warrant that we now know was obtained through perjury and raided 4 homes near the intersection of 39th and Dalton. During the course of this raid, approximately 35 young people were arrested, beaten, the women were strip searched, and files were set up, and then they were released without charges. Meanwhile, 4 homes were completely destroyed. It was an outrageous operation that was supposedly targeted at a local street gang, the Rolling 30s, but in fact became an attack on an entire neighborhood.
There's anyone within this department, or there's anyone outside of the department that believes that this department will tolerate or has tolerated at any time excessive force, they are very badly mistaken.
Officers aren't prosecuted. It should happen, but it doesn't happen. Sometimes they're dismissed from the department. Most of the time they're not, even if they're found to be out of policy. Officers feel safe. If you beat up somebody who's black or Hispanic or somebody who's poor in the lower socioeconomic stratification, the chances of having to answer back to that are very nil, next to none.
If we were to bring out every misconduct which is alleged and sustained on the Los Angeles Police Department, whether it's officer-involved shooting or the beating of Rodney King, civil liability is the biggest reason why so many cases are covered up. There's not enough money in the city of Los Angeles, okay, to pay out all these claims.
I remember when I was approximately 13, 14 years old, when the police would roll through the neighborhoods and they would ask you, have you been to jail? If you told them you haven't been to jail, they're going to take you to jail. They will take you to jail so they could fingerprint you, so they could take your picture. Now, then they let you go, okay? They let you go home. Now, all of my friends have been fingerprinted and mug-shotted for nothing. Brutality, that's just the start of the brutality.
They be getting mad when you say that. Okay, so we just told him what's up, he didn't come here and went to jail.
LAPD started with a unit called CRASH, which is an acronym for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. And assuming that the hoodlums they were going after had identifiable features, LAPD was going to restrict their conduct towards those people. Later, things changed, and it began to include anybody who was young, male, and black. It began to include anybody who was on the street after a certain hour, anyone who was suspected of wearing clothing that the police considered gang attire, and then anyone at all on the street, male or female. The massive sweeps ran from late 1987 through 1990. And in the course of 1 year, nearly 50,000 people were taken to jail without even a blink. the large percentage of people who had been arrested had no criminal charges sustained against them. There was no reduction or significant reduction in the amount of crime. So it was just simply a massive engagement of a denial of constitutional and civil rights of people who had been on the street. The massive sweeps were going on during that period of time, but they've continued to have sweeps ever since then.
As an experienced crash officer, when we started this thing, I was one of many who told supervision that we can't accomplish what we're after here. But in spite of that, those files are full of inaccuracies because not many people, not many gang members at that time during those operations were ever interviewed or arrested or dealt with in any way.
Education, not incarceration. Education, not incarceration. Education, not incarceration. Education, not incarceration. Education, not incarceration.
The training at the Los Angeles Police Academy is a paramilitary type of training. And with this kind of training, what it does is it desensitizes, dehumanizes the police in relation to the community, so that the community is no longer viewed as just civilians, but viewed as potential enemies. One of the training tapes is called the taser dance, and it's this sort of perverted mentality that is destroying any kind of bond between law enforcement and our community, and is in reinforcing the us against them aspect of law enforcement.
I've oftentimes asked myself, is this something that is organized? Is this something that's spontaneous? Is this something that is as a result of frustration and working in the neighborhood and becoming callous? Because policemen, when they become police officers, are full of vigor and they're full of life, and they want to help the community. But then as the years set in, the frustration sets in, they become a little bit more callous. Is this something that's condoned? And I have concluded as a supervisor that it is condoned, that it is well aware at the supervisory levels.
I grew up in Watts. I wanted to be a police officer to help the community. Starting in the academy, the double standard was very clear. It was very clear that blacks on the job were second class. Women also were second class citizens. As a rookie, a group of white officers had gotten together and discussed getting me terminated because I grew up in Watts and I knew all the suspects on the street. So they wouldn't know who to trust because I was so comfortable being around black guys. This is the type of racism that is allowed to go on within the department.
The element of racism that exists outside the LAPD is exactly what spawns it inside the LAPD. Those power brokers who control politics in the city of Los Angeles who turned a blind eye to racism allow for figureheads like Gates to exist. Now, the assumption that because they've got a new chief, Willie Williams, that things are going to change so dramatically, I don't know that it's all that simple, because middle management and upper management is still filled with the same racists who overlooked the beatings that led up to Rodney King.
Oh, he is all messed up. Oh, poor thing. Oh, look at his face.
And they all just laughing.
They had the school police out here, girl.
Yeah, they just laughing.
Rodney King just went through the beating that we've all seen for the 100th time. Well, you'll see in a moment the condition in which this man with a broken leg and a smashed face was loaded into the ambulance and how he was bound. This is called a cord cuff restraint. It's an approved LAPD method of restraining human beings. They call it the hog tie. And he's still hogtied, and this is what someone looks like when they're hogtied and being put in an ambulance. This is so ugly and so disgusting. Now, this is a whole nother part of the state, you see. This is the paramedics and the fire department and so on. This shows how institutionalized this behavior is and how acceptable it is to broad layers of the state.
Stanley, I think that you and the rest of the police commission made a great choice in chief. Thank you.
Chief Willie Williams was the first reform that was implemented in response to the independent investigation into the Los Angeles Police Department, also known as the Christopher Commission. What he's been able to do since he's been chief of police, he certainly has gone into the community, he certainly has interacted with the community in a very positive sense, made the community feel that at least he's on their team. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of that sort of mentality necessarily trickling down into the ranks of the police force when they interact with the community and the streets. One of the ideas to improve community relations between police and the community, of course, was the idea of community-based policing.
And next week we start citing for not being in violation with the information cards. The hats and everything else, it's too much of what's going on, okay? You guys keep adding things to it.
You could ask almost any police force across the nation what they think of community-based policing, and they would all say probably that they think it's a good thing, and they would all say in some form or another they have community-based policing within their police force or their sheriff's force. Community-based policing requires more time and energy on the behalf of individual police officers because they have to get out of their car and they maybe have to walk around or ride bicycles or over a smaller territory than they could if they were just patrolling in their cars. And that may help to reduce crime. But that is not probably going to have much effect on police brutality and excessive use of force.
If I were Willie Williams, the first reform that I would have would be to call for and support community control of the police. If we don't have community control of the police, Proposition F won't work. Community-based policing won't work. Any little in-between Band-Aid approaches won't work because there's no bridge. There's been gap between the police and our community. And if we don't have community control of the police, then we're going to have people out there dying.
Jail killer cops! Jail killer cops! Jail killer cops!
Daryl was a recent graduate of Rio Hondo Police Academy. He was an aspiring police officer. He graduated in the top 10 of his class academically. Daryl was a federal witness in an upcoming trial scheduled for August of this year. This trial was against the LAPD, 5 white police officers who brutally and savagely beat another black man in Van Nuys, Austin Shanks. Since Daryl's involvement in the case, he received many harassing visits from the LAPD. On April 5th, when Daryl got out of the car about 7:45 that night, he was visited by a barrage of bullets from the LAPD. It was more than 2 officers, but so far only 2 officers have been implicated in this murder. Officers Bruce Nelson and Brett Richards. So he's another African-American male here in Los Angeles in the last 2 years that was unarmed, not posing a lethal or dangerous threat to anybody, including the Los Angeles Police Department, and was, murdered or killed by the police department. I hope, in fact, that these officers are brought to justice. There's a pattern in this country where police officers have murdered with impunity, and the federal government and state government have both turned their faces.
No peace! No justice! No peace!
What needs to be taken seriously is how many unarmed people have we shot and killed in Los Angeles Police Department? How many false people have we arrested? How many people do we release, okay, because they were falsely arrested? You don't get any days off for killing someone, but if you make an improper remark or you fail to give a citizen a card, you will immediately get disciplined and you'll probably get days off. Why? How is it you can kill somebody here and get away with it, and the worst thing that's going to happen to you is they're going to say, well, you need some additional training for tactics. It's management. Management is accountable to what happens at every level of the police department. And I've seen way too many bad shootings, okay, or questionable shootings involving LAPD, where no discipline was issued, okay, and people were killed.
If we're talking about community control of the police, we're talking about a civilian police review board. That means in any city, according to the size, they can set up an independent body elected by those communities. There are some very clear demands. We need independent investigations. We cannot rely on Willie Williams. We cannot rely on the LAPD or the sheriff to investigate the allegations of police abuse, not only in the city of LA, but anywhere in the country. We need subpoena powers. We need to have the ability to walk in to any police department and see what the history and the record of that officer is.
Beating and killing is a crime. The police do jail time. Beating and killing is a crime.
Whistleblowers clause. The whistleblowers clause will allow a police officer to see something like the Rodney King beating and say, hold it, I ain't going for this. This is wrong. You know it's wrong. Damn it. And if I have to draw my weapon, I'll draw my weapon for the people. If our civilian police review board does not have the power to fire an officer after he or she has committed an act of brutality or whatever, then they don't have any power. So we have to include the power to fire, power to change policy. If the police department has policies that we find out that not only are racist, but are abusive, then we should have the power to change those policies.
Let's say it so I can hear you.
We launched the campaign for Civilian Police Review Board back in 1979. The Coalition Against Police Abuse organized, did the research with a number of attorneys and community groups, and got over 100,000 people to say, I'm willing to stand up for this review board. After the Rodney King beating, we also came into a position where we could get people to organize around the review board. There are other review boards in this country. They have little components of what I'm talking about. I'm saying you need all these components to get community control of the police.
Here's the question, and I'ma give it to you plain. Why is our nation playing rainbow-colored games? Speaking of the flag for which it stands, one nation under God is still in demand. We're getting treated like a piece of pig skin in the trash. Throwing down blows for a racial badge, cause we're being disrespected. It don't mean a thing. Was it really worth it?
Nope.
For one Rodney King, I think so. The fact seems sweet and clear that nothing has changed after one dark year. LA is still hurting, but the house don't care. The only way that's our back is if we're up in their underwear. Trying to take them down cause of the way they treat us. Who gives them the right to think that they can't beat us? It's not a simple task to make y'all understand that life is still hard for a Latin and black man. Ain't nothing changed but the days of the year. Hey, ain't nothing changed. Ain't nothing changed. USA is in fear. Words. Ain't nothing changed.
Make sure you don't pan so fast. We watched you when you were doing that march the other day. You were moving the camera too fast, so when you get back to editing, you're going to find that you're not going to use the shots because they're a little too swift and a little sloppy. Is that correct?